For centuries, the story of religion has been dominated by the Abrahamic faiths, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. History books often trace spirituality back to Mesopotamia or Jerusalem, but what about Africa? Long before the Bible was written, before missionaries arrived, before colonial powers redefined belief systems, Africa already had deeply structured, powerful spiritual traditions. These systems were not primitive, as colonizers described them, but highly organized, philosophical, and symbolic. They shaped morality, kingship, community laws, medicine, and even early science. To erase them was to erase the soul of African civilization. This video uncovers the spiritual systems you were never taught, and how they influenced the world in ways hidden from mainstream history. Spirituality versus religion. African spirituality was not bound by rigid dogma or holy texts like the Bible or Quran. Instead, it was fluid, rooted in nature, ancestry, and cosmic balance. Unlike Western religion, that divides the sacred from the secular, African spirituality made no such distinction. Farming, governance, healing, music, and art were all spiritual. This worldview emphasized oneness, the interconnectedness of the divine, humanity, and the environment. The ancestors were not dead, but living presences guiding the community. Spirits resided in rivers, forests, stones, and the skies. Not distant or inaccessible, but active participants in daily life. Mat, ancient Egypt's spiritual blueprint. Mat was not just a goddess, but also a cosmic principle. It represented truth, justice, harmony, balance, and order. Egyptians believed that the entire universe, from the stars to human society, was held together by Mat. Without Mat Gibbs, there would be chaos called Isfet, pharaohs. Their job was not just ruling, but keeping balance, ensuring justice, peace, and harmony in the land. Priests, through rituals, they honored Mat and kept the spiritual balance between gods and humans. Common people, living honestly, being fair, respecting family, and caring for community equals living in line with Mat. So Mat wasn't only religion, it was the moral code, social law, and spiritual order, all in one. Egyptians believed, when a person died, their heart's symbol of conscience was weighed against the feather of Mat. If the heart was light, meaning the person lived truthfully, without guilt, they entered eternal life. If the heart was heavy, full of lies, greed, injustice, the soul was destroyed by Ammit the devourer. Notice, judgment wasn't based on belief or worship. It was based on how ethically you lived your life. Mat existed thousands of years before the Ten Commandments. Many biblical ideas, truth, justice, not stealing, not lying, honoring parents reflect the ethics of Mat. Scholars believe Abrahamic traditions, Judaism, Christianity, Islam were influenced by Egyptian spiritual thought, directly or indirectly. Mat shows that Africans had advanced ethical spiritual systems long before Western religions. It proves spirituality was not about blind belief, but about living truthfully, fairly, and in balance with the universe. Mat was Africa's first moral law, a blueprint for truth, justice, and cosmic harmony that shaped not only Egypt, but also influenced world religions that came after. Nubia and Kush. The Black Pharaoh's sacred kingdom, Nubia and Kush, lay south of ancient Egypt, along the Nile, in today's Sudan. For thousands of years, they were not Egypt's shadow, but a parallel African civilization with their own culture, spirituality, and power. They produced the famous Black Pharaoh's kings, who once ruled all of Egypt during the 25th dynasty. Napata, near the Holy Mountain, Jebel Barkal and Meru became major centers of Nubian spirituality. Temples here were not just Egyptian copies. They had distinct gods and rituals unique to Kushite identity. Example, Apadmak, a lion-headed warrior god, symbol of strength, war, and protection. He was different from Egypt's gods and reflected the Nubians' connection to Africa's natural environment and warrior traditions. Nubian kings were seen as chosen by the gods, ruling not just politically, but spiritually. Like Egyptian pharaohs, they were guardians of cosmic order, but in Kush, this sacred kingship was also shared with women rulers. The Kandakes, queens, mothers of Kush held extraordinary power. They were not just consorts, but sovereigns and spiritual leaders themselves. Some Kandakes even led armies, made political alliances, and conducted rituals. This showed a balance of male and female power. Kings and queens together upheld the cosmic order. Later religions, Judaism, Christianity, Islam often reduced women's leadership roles, but Nubia celebrated gender balance in governance and spirituality. Nubia and Kush demonstrate that African spirituality was not Egypt only. Other powerful African civilizations had their own divine systems. They show a fusion of politics and spirituality, where leaders were guardians of cosmic harmony. Most importantly, they reveal that gender equality in sacred leadership was central to African traditions. Long before patriarchy dominated world religions, the kingdoms of Nubia and Kush were sacred monarchies, where kings and queens ruled as both political leaders and divine protectors, guided by gods like Apep-Mak, upholding a spiritual balance that respected both men and women. The Yoruba Ifa system. Sacred wisdom through divination. The Yoruba people live mainly in Nigeria, Benin, and Togo in West Africa. They developed one of the oldest, richest spiritual traditions in the world, the Ifa system. Unlike dogmatic religions, Ifa is not just belief, but a science of wisdom, philosophy, and destiny. At the heart of Yoruba spirituality are the Orisha divine beings, who represent both natural forces and human qualities. They are not gods in the Western sense, but manifestations of the supreme creator, Olodumare. Examples of Orisha. Shango gives god of thunder, justice, and fire, symbol of authority. Ocean gives goddess of rivers, fertility, beauty, and love, symbol of nurturing power. Ogun gives god of iron, technology, and war, symbol of strength and innovation. Through Orisha, the Yoruba explained life, morality, balance, and destiny. Ifa is not random fortune-telling. It's a structured divination system with its own knowledge base. The Babelio priest of Ifa uses tools like the opal chain or sacred palm nuts. Through these, he interprets signs connected to Ifa versus Odu. Ifa, an oral library of over 256 sacred texts. These verses include philosophy, moral lessons, healing remedies, and guidance for personal or communal problems. Helps people align with their destiny. Ori guides them in ethical living, truth, respect, balance. Provides healing knowledge, herbs, plus spiritual rituals. Strengthens community through shared rituals, chants, and festivals. Far from superstition, Ifa is respected as a philosophical system. In Arlingling Wu, UNESCO recognized Ifa divination as part of humanity's intangible cultural heritage. Today, millions across West Africa and the African diaspora, Brazil, Cuba, Caribbean, U.S., still practice Ifa. Nyame and the Abyssum. The Akan people of Ghana believe in Nyame, the supreme creator. Under Nyame are the Abyssum, spiritual beings tied to natural forces, rivers, forests, sky, fertility, etc. This shows a worldview where nature and divinity are inseparable. Ancestors Nsamanfo. As mediators, the Nsamanfo ancestors play a key role as a bridge between the living and the creator. Families honor them through rituals, asking guidance and protection. This makes community life deeply spiritual and ethical, guided by ancestral wisdom. The sacred Golden Stool in Ashanti tradition. The Golden Stool is more than a throne. It embodies the soul of the entire nation. It symbolized unity, identity, and divine legitimacy for rulers. Here, politics and spirituality were one. proving African governance was rooted in sacred belief. Ashanti, spirituality linked creator, nature, and ancestors into one system, where even kingship and national identity were sacred. The Zulu and Nguni traditions, Unkalunku, and the living ancestors for the Zulu and other Nguni peoples. The supreme being was Unkalunku, the first ancestor who created humanity. Spirituality focused on honoring him through the ancestors, making everyday life deeply connected to the spirit world. Living ancestors and rituals ancestors were seen as active members of the family, guiding and protecting the living. People offered food, beer, and prayers, especially during ceremonies, to maintain balance and blessing. This made spirituality part of daily life, not separate religion. Sangoma's healers and guides, Sangoma's traditional healers, were both doctors and spiritual mediators. They treated illness as not only physical, but also a spiritual imbalance. This holistic approach anticipated ideas in psychology and psychosomatic medicine centuries before the West. In short, Zulu and Nguni traditions honored Unkalunku ancestors and healing rituals, creating a complete system that united health, spirituality, and community life. Ethiopia, a bridge between indigenous faith and Christianity. Before Christianity, Ethiopians worshipped sky gods, fertility deities, and natural sacred sites, such as Lake Tana. Nature and divinity were deeply linked, with rituals honoring both cosmic and earthly powers. In the 4th century CE, Ethiopia became one of the first nations in the world to adopt Christianity officially. Unlike elsewhere, the shift did not erase old beliefs. Instead, Christianity blended with local spirituality. Ancestor reverence was mirrored in the veneration of Christian saints. The rock-hewn churches of Lalibela embodied African sacred architecture carved from living earth, connecting biblical faith with indigenous earth worship traditions. Ethiopia stands out as a land where indigenous African spirituality and Christianity fused, creating a unique spiritual identity that survives to this day. African spirituality in nature. In African spirituality, rivers, forests, mountains, and animals were not just resources, but living spiritual entities. The land itself was seen as sacred, with the belief that land is life. Many African groups believed nature was protected by spirits. Example, the Shona of Zimbabwe honor the Mondoro spirits, seen as guardians of the land and bringers of rain. This shows how survival, farming, and spirituality were one. When colonizers seized land, it was not only economic theft, but also spiritual dislocation. Removing Africans from their sacred land broke their connection to ancestors, gods, and balance with nature. Asterisk for Africans, nature was divine, and losing land meant losing both livelihood and spirituality. Colonial erasure. Demonizing the old faiths. When Europeans and missionaries arrived, they labeled African spirituality as pagan, savage, or witchcraft. Shrines were destroyed, priests were executed, and oral traditions were suppressed. The aim was not only to convert, but to erase identity. By branding African gods as demons and replacing sacred traditions with imported religion, colonialism severed generations from their ancestral spiritual wisdom. Survival and resistance. Hidden practices. Despite suppression, African spirituality survived. Enslaved Africans carried their beliefs to the Americas, where they transformed into Vodun in Haiti, Candamel in Brazil, and Santeria in Cuba. These traditions preserved Orisha worship, ancestor veneration, and sacred drumming, even under the disguise of Catholic saints. Back in Africa, many communities practiced dual faiths, attending church or mosque publicly while maintaining ancestral rituals privately. Asterisk the relevance of African spirituality today. African spirituality is making a comeback. From the rise of Yoruba, Ifa priests and the diaspora to renewed interest in mat philosophy, People are reclaiming what was stolen. These traditions remind us of values often missing in modern religion: environmental respect, community-centered living, gender balance, and the idea that spirituality is not separate from life, but woven into every action. Conclusion: before the Bible, there was Africa. African spirituality was never primitive. It was profound, complex, and global in its influence. Before the Bible, Africa already had systems of morality, divine order, and sacred connection. To study them is not to reject modern faiths, but to acknowledge the roots they grew from. Africa is not the dark continent, it is the cradle of spirituality, and its wisdom still speaks today.